Perfect. So my name is Joseph Mckinney, and I'm a hack. And I'm here to tell you about hacked zones. So one of the big themes that we've all been talking about is, contrary to a tech startup where you can start in a garage, or now you can start with a Claude code subscription, it takes a long time to even get to MVP. Basically, in this model, instead of building up an initial MVP that you spin out, you can get tested in the market, people can tell you they like it or don't like it, and you can modify it. You basically have to start from garage to an iPhone 100 all in one fell swoop. That makes it really difficult for funders, VCs who are looking for, even now, for like 7, maximum 10-year horizons for their capital investment, especially when the chances of actually getting an agreement with a government are very low. But there might be a middle ground there that can act more like a traditional startup MVP while achieving similar results with the ability to scale to the type of reforms that we're talking about in Prosper and what have you. And I think we need to make a distinction. Normally, when we're talking about zones, we talk about next generation zones that are charter cities or what have you as its own class. But we also tend to focus this as a logistics zone, a finance zone, a tech zone, a trade zone, a tax zone, a biotech zone. Those are the types of industries that they're trying to attract. But we should also have classification in how these zones are created. Before I do that, I want to give a little background about myself. So my name is Joseph Mckinney. I've been in this space for about 10 years. Started out with a tiny nonprofit called Startup Society Foundation, a lot of pop content, conferences and trade shows. And then we launched a peer-reviewed journal that's still active today. In fact, go read it. It's the source for academic peer-reviewed work in special jurisdictions. We also launched a how-to guide co-authored by Mark Frazier, specifically on telling entrepreneurs how to start small and then scale to a special economic zone. And one of the things that we talk about in that book is specifically about the idea of a quick start, the idea of how do you get to the most minimally viable product and scale so you don't have to get hundreds of millions of dollars from a capital investor before you even get a government agreement. Because the main way that people talk about it, and thankfully the designers of the ZAs worked a long time ago, about 20 years ago, with a design zone. They negotiate directly with the national government, they make a bespoke special economic zone model, and then they implement it on the federal level. But there are other ways to do it. If you want to have something that has more shallow reforms, but are with existing frameworks, so you don't have to negotiate with the national government over many, many years, you could do what I called back in the day stack zones. There are already existing zone frameworks within most countries that you can deal with, and most of them by themselves kind of suck. They're not really great. They're mostly on like tax relief and what have you, but there's often multiple types of programs that if you stack them on top of each other, you can concentrate benefits. So that can be sort of an MVP. But there's actually one step further, and this goes to what I did after Startup Societies, which is we founded the first special economic zone in the United States by working with a tribal government. And we didn't do this. We didn't design it from scratch. We didn't go to Washington, D.C. and pass it in Congress, get signed by the president, what have you. What we did is a hacked zone. So when I first told people about what we did with tribal governments, they were like, well, what you're doing is just a legal hack. And I got really angry about that. I'm like, these are sovereigns. It seemed like to diminish the work that we were doing. But, like many of you, I've been playing around with OpenClaw and Claude Code, whatever, so now I see myself as a tech genius. And I'm looking at these computer analogies here, and I started looking at the definition of the word hack. Hack just means you are taking pieces of a system and you are implementing them in a way that was not intended. And that's actually precisely what we did. And it goes down to the idea that, and this is what a design zone is, so just getting a little context. This is stack zone, as we mentioned before. So in the United States, there are enterprise zones, there are foreign trade zones, there are opportunity zones that can have some benefit, and it doesn't take a lot to do. This is a hacked zone. So the real fundamentals are, just taking the computer analogy, there are digital primitives, the building blocks of code that lead to a system. There are also legal primitives. There are fundamental precedents within law that you can stack together to get the fundamental parts of what is a special economic zone. And a special economic zone or a charter city, there are fundamental elements to them, namely the ability to have regulatory reform, separate administrative bodies, the ability to have their own courts, the ability to have their own statutes, et cetera, and have, importantly, a public-private relationship. In the United States, at least, and I think this could apply to other countries, those legal primitives exist without having to go to a federal reform. Specifically, in the area of federal Indian law, they have tax authority, regulatory authority, administrative authority, courts, ability to do public-private partnerships. The problem is they haven't put them together. People hadn't even conceived of this before. But if we put them all together, we can have these reforms and have them close or even as if they were federal reforms without having to go to a federal level. So let me give you an example. So we found out, yes, so we got introduced to a tribe called the Catawba Indian Nation. We worked with their attorneys, and we discovered they have the ability to do their own commercial code, corporate code, administrative bodies, and what have you. So we formed a draft of a legislation. And then we realized, okay, so this is the basic mechanics of making a charter city. But after that, we're like, okay, well, you have the ability to have a special economic zone, but do you have any real leverage? Are you going to provide any arbitrage to attract any new businesses? So we had to find regulatory primitives. So we discovered, okay, in addition to those things we just mentioned, tribes can also do company incorporation. They have the same level as a U.S. state. That's a precedent. So they have the ability, like U.S. states, to do banking, which means that they also have the ability to do digital assets. And as a consequence of that, we realized that there was a stack of primitives that we could make to attract an industry like digital assets. And because it's digital in nature versus physical, the capital requirements to do that are significantly less than if we went straight to the physical field. So not only are we jump-starting things by working with legal primitives, we're also working in an industry that has lower capital requirements. So let me give you an example of this. So in the United States, there is an exemption by the SEC that you do not have to register an offering if it meets certain requirements. So ones that you're probably familiar with are Regulation D, Regulation CF, Regulation A, but there is a lesser known exemption called an intrastate offering exemption that says that if you are making an offering in a state to others in a state, you are exempt from registration, which means that you can fundraise from non-accredited investors. Well, if you look at the law, it actually says it doesn't necessarily have to be an individual person or a brick and mortar business. It could be a company that's incorporated within the jurisdiction that has the majority of their assets there. And if you combine that with the legal primitive, which is in the United States, tribes, if there's ambiguity in statute, they have to defer to tribes. If you combine those things together, you can essentially create a platform that allows for any company that's incorporated in the zone digitally to make an unlimited offering to other companies that are within the zone. But that does not mean you have to be physically located there. Imagine that you're in Delaware, you're in Wyoming, you're in Honduras, and you have a LLC of, within the zone. Even if you're a non-accredited investor, you can participate in that offering, and then the company can accept your capital even though it isn't registered. All of these things, they exist as legal primitives. They do not require additional federal regulation. However, they have the impact as if someone passed a federal law that said that non-accredited investors can now invest in your project. So that's a pretty good example of that. And now we're moving to not just the digital space, but working in physical environments as well. And one of the legal primitives that we're working with is the idea of the plenary authority of Congress. And this means essentially that tribes, they're not bound by executive order. They're only bound by the laws of Congress. And that can be very interesting in the realm of trade, specifically in the idea of tariffs. So right now, the Trump tariffs, they are only applicable in executive order. There's no congressional act that affects it. So if you take, let's say, a foreign trade zone, which is an area outside of a customs territory, and you put that within a reservation, it would be immune from the executive order. So it would be the only place in the United States that would be exempt from the Trump tariffs. That would normally have to be an enormous lobbying process in order to make that happen. But just by working with the legal primitives we have here, we're able to create the most competitive trade zone in the United States, all without having to go on the national scale. But it can go even further. what we call a compacted zone. And thank God for Prospera and New Way for doing all the work here. They have found a way that you can actually scale to a federal level, and you still don't have to necessarily get national approval. And it's the idea that if you have multiple sovereigns have a compact with one another, and you have implied consent, that has the same level as federal law. So the goal would be to start digital with the primitives that already exist today, develop financial capital and political capital, move on to physical industries with that, and then use that political and financial capital to do a compact, and then have the same level as, let's say, a ZA, all without having to spend years and years and years through the national process. So I think that could be a more effective way of moving forward as an industry, rather than having a time scale of decades, potentially. Now there is some drawbacks to that. There's more uncertainty and what have you than if you have it on a national scale. So if you have the time horizon that you can do that, you have the patience, or if you have a really good contact with ideally a small host nation, that's fantastic. But for really competitive jurisdictions like the United States, where there's lots of capital, lots of human capital, lots of land and infrastructure, but have really big governments that are really hard to lobby with, a hacked zone might be the best methodology. So I talked a mile a minute. We got about 3 minutes for questions. Happy to hear them.
Maybe a dumb question, but this may be it. Earlier, when you were talking about getting around the tariffs by, basically having it come from tribal land or something like that, as soon as goods leave the tribal lands, are they then subject to tariffs, or?
So I was definitely simplifying that a lot. So one of the things in the Trump tariff said specifically is they eliminated what they call the Made in America exemption, because normally when you're in a foreign trade zone and you get foreign inputs, if you transform the goods substantially, it becomes American-made product and it enters the customs territory without tariff. But with the executive order, Trump eliminated that. What the arbitrage is specifically is even if your inputs are from China, Brazil, or what have you, if you're able to significantly transform it, it has made American status because the executive order does not apply within an Indian foreign trade zone. Do we have another question? Yeah. Okay, great.
So do you have most of this set up already, and who are like your first people who are going to be working with you?
So we've already set up with the Catawba Indian Nation. They have a digital economic zone, and they're currently running with it. We're scaling to other tribes across the United States. We are looking at we're in negotiation with the tribe in the Bay Area, as well as the Upper Peninsula, a couple in Southern California, and soon in New Mexico and Oklahoma.
So you have these tribes. So who are the companies who are joining, who are coming in under these tribes?
Well, so we have investors that do already have anchor tenants that are specifically looking for these arbitrages, and we'll be reaching out to them as well. But we're looking into ones that are in the manufacturing industry for that specific one, but are experiencing significant tariffs. Obviously, digital asset companies would really benefit from this. They've certainly seen a brick wall when it comes to the Clarity Act, so they want to provide as much optimization from a free market standpoint. So those are the type of people that we attract. But I haven't even touched on the broad swath of different industries and regulatory arbitrage we can do. I just wanted to give you a couple of core examples. Do we got one more quick question?
It wasn't clear to me how these zones are protected. So, for example, in Honduras, we have like these legal political headwinds that take us back and forth. Yeah. Is that a reality in the U.S. as well?
Yeah. So what they have in the United States under federal Indian law, you're allowed to, because they have what they call sovereign immunity, as Eric mentioned. But if you sign a contract with them, you can add an explicit waiver of sovereign immunity, so you can hold them liability as if they're a non-sovereign entity. There's also additional safeguards that we're adding. Eric mentioned, bonds and what have you that can add additional protection. I think that's it. All right, thanks all. So we